6 people at the most outside loading that car, but we may as well get underway.
This is Pam from NortheastWheelsEvents.com at the 2023 MGT Register Kimberley Festival at the Simeon Museum in Philadelphia.
Tom is well known, I think, to everyone in the T-Series cars because he sells parts that are superior to anything we can buy from any other source. He's also on the phone and the computer all the time answering questions. And he is the keeper of the Arnold registry, of which we're fortunate to have a fine example here. So Tom is going to talk about the Arnolt-mg. It's an Anglo-Italian beauty.
And American.
First, let me thank Terry Sanders in California for asking me to take over the Arnold registry and supplying me with all of his voluminous years of documentation and research, some of which was also provided by the late Jarl and his son John DeBoer. Also, Michael Arnold, Wacky Arnold's son, has provided me with many details and memories of his father's life with cars, and also a number of the technical registers of delivery. And of course, John Elwood, whose lovely Arnold he's brought here to show you, and which has improved my talk by a factor of 10 just by being here. This is a text from a 1953 Arnolt-mg ad describing the basis for the Arnold. He says, "The new Arnolt family and sports car features an MG chassis and Italian body, is designed for those who want spirited performance and the newest and smartest in aerodynamic styling. If you're looking for a car that is distinctive in appearance, that steps out with plenty of pep when you push down the throttle, that is easy to maneuver in heavy traffic, that is easy to park, that takes corners fast with complete safety, and that is economical to operate, then here is your automobile, the new Arnolt family and sports car. Take your choice of convertible or coupe. Either will give you a new kind of motoring pleasure you have never before enjoyed, a new pride of ownership you have never before experienced. You'll like the smart aerodynamic styling, next please, of the Italian body lines. Your family will welcome the extra roominess with which this four-passenger car provides. Your entire family can enjoy together the thrill of sports car motoring." Now, I should also tell you that I'm not going to be commenting on every slide. Some of them are just selected slides from different cars, so you can see a number of the characteristics. In particular, there's one very beautiful red car that Jim Silva in California restored, and it was sold by Fantasy Junction. Their website has a tab for sold vehicles, and the extensively photographed car is shown there. Now, if you were a comfortably off Italian businessman in the early 1950s who wanted a present for his wife, they would together consider something reliable, say, a Fiat 1100 or 1400 for her to take their children to school in the hilly Italian countryside. Next, please. A four-door or a small station wagon with good visibility, with enough interior room for the one more child she planned to have. She probably wanted a black or a gray car, something that would display their common sense in the town and to the neighbors, but still suggest their status. And our businessman would then go to the local Fiat dealer and buy his car. But if this same Italian businessman chose to buy an automobile for the other woman in his life, for his mistress, he would want a very different car. Next, please. An open two-seater, something red, sleek, and stylish, with a raked windshield, large tachometer and speedometer, and all appropriate gauges. This time, maybe an Alfa 1900. And for this, he would want a custom car. He would order a rolling chassis from Alfa, complete with running gear, to be delivered to his favorite custom bodybuilder, Touring, Pininfarina, Bertone, Vignale, Zagato, Ghia, Frua, or any one of a dozen other bespoke, that is, custom Italian body shops active at the time. After discussions and drawings from the body maker were approved, and perhaps 6 months or so of construction, a custom car would appear. If the design was successful, and with many unique requirements of the purchaser, not all were, it might perhaps be exhibited at the next Salon Auto Show in Paris, Milan, or Turin, and be heralded as another design success. Others might see the car and order their version of it from the same maker or from a different maker, perhaps on a Lange chassis, or with smaller windows for a more sleek appearance, or with a lower windshield or a larger trunk for more luggage. One might order a Nardi 5-speed transmission. One might specify triple Weber carbs for a lower bonnet. All custom design features and details, dramatic as would befit a certain lifestyle, perhaps even with an ostrich leather interior and a clear lucite steering wheel. Occasionally, more than a half-dozen copies were made of a particularly successful car, since there was always stiff competition to have the most up-to-date design. Next, please. The sky was the limit, as the BAT designs demonstrate. Similarly, in the 20s and 30s in America, one might buy a top-of-the-line car like a Duesenberg, a Cord, a Cadillac, and commission Locke, Fisher, Bowman & Schwartz, Fleetwood, Dietrich, Murphy, or any one of the dozens of American custom body makers, coach builders, to make limousines, roadsters, or any other design to the owner's specifications. But by 1952, next please, both the American and Italian automotive industries had begun to change and had moved away from separate chassis construction, which had been the norm for some 50 years, where the engine, transmission, suspension, and body were all bolted to a separate chassis, like an MG T-Series. With post-war cash and steel shortages and new industrial cost-saving approaches, car makers around the world found it cheaper to move to unibody or monocoque construction of automobiles, where the body and a floor pan formed of multiple stampings welded together resulted in a strong skeleton framework onto which everything, the drivetrain, brakes, suspension, doors, interior, were all bolted. This is a later example of a unibody, but it's a perfect example of what one started with. Less steel was needed with unibody construction, and using aluminum would mean not only a weight savings, but more aerodynamic and efficient cars. Next, please. Custom Italian body makers struggled to accept this radically changing auto industry, since they no longer could be provided with bare chassis on which to create their designs. And so at the 1952 Turin Auto Show, fewer custom body makers than ever were on exhibit, and more automobile manufacturers who could now offer a wider variety of unibody designs, roadsters, station wagons, sedans with pillars and withouts, and so on, often at less cost. Into this tumultuous world of auto construction and design, next please, walked Stanley H. Arnolt II, an American entrepreneur and businessman who strolled among the stands of designs looking for something that caught his fancy. As the largest British car importer in the Midwest US at the time, he was a man who knew his mind. He had a stellar reputation in the industry as someone who could make anything. His design and shop capabilities had already put to extensive good use during the Second World War. Next, please. The Arnolt Corporation made top-secret parts for bombers and other aircraft, ramps and loading equipment, landing gear, and many other specialized and precision government products. Arnolt came into his own as the maker, next please, of a 4-cylinder marine engine called the Sea-Mite, originally designed as an auxiliary engine for yachts during the 1920s, but falling out of favor with the Depression. Arnolt benefited from the US government buying large numbers of these versatile 20 horsepower engines to propel tenders, start aircraft, as pumps and other power supplies. After the war, Arnolt continued this successful manufacturing empire, making aluminum his metal of choice, offering everything from boats sold by Sears Roebuck and spotlights to what were known as club smokers, the spun aluminum ashtrays found in theater lobbies and on Pullman trains. But Wacky Arnolt, so known because he piloted a 13-foot dinghy powered by one of these Semite engines a full 100 miles across Lake Michigan from St. Joseph, Michigan to Chicago, Arnolt was the car-struck Midwest distributor of Morris, MG, Riley, and other Nuffield products. Next, please. His goal in life was to be not just a car dealer, but a manufacturer, which is what took him to Turin in 1952. Among the many booths there, one had two attractive cars, an open convertible and a closed coupe, which caught his eye. Coupe, technically, but everyone says coupe. Based on the reliable MGTD chassis and running gear, Giovanni and his son Nuccio Bertone had built two cars very much on spec, a last gasp to try to maintain his custom business, since he saw that unibodies were forcing him into bankruptcy. Arnolt was struck by the Bertone's Michelotti design, next please, and offered to buy them both, much to the maker's delight. Bertone's reality was that their sale meant that he could stave off his inevitable financial ruin for a few more months. But Arnolt clearly saw a market for cars like these in the US, a bridge between the four-seater family car and the European sports cars that were beginning to make a significant sales impact, the best of both worlds. So imagine Bertone's surprise when Arnolt assured him that he did not just want these two cars, but wished to order a full 200 more, 100 convertibles and 100 coupes. One can only imagine Bertone's realization that in one stroke, his 40-year business had been saved by an American stranger wearing cowboy boots and a Stetson hat. Next, please. At least that's the story. Bertone himself wrote of a somewhat different objective in translation now. Quote, "This Mr. Arnolt approached me and asked, 'You are Bertone, right? I want these two cars.' Gladly I would have sold him both. But I was obliged to tell him that there might be a problem. My objective was to get MG to commission a couple of 100 examples," unquote. Now it's a little unclear which version of this story to believe. I tend to believe Arnolt. Bertone was more concerned with appearances than Arnolt was. Next, please. Make no mistake, Bertone had made two custom bodies, two unique bodies, and had never made more than 2 or 3 duplicates of any car before, much less 200. And it can safely be said that Arnold's 1952 investment in the Bertone Company, by commissioning the Arnolt MG cars, made it possible for Bertone to have survived to this day. The car Arnolt wanted was utterly familiar to him. The stock MGTD chassis, drivetrain, suspension, and the central instrument panel formed the basis of these custom cars. Next, please. But with steel bodies and aluminum doors, bonnet, and trunk. Bertone bodies were not bolted, but welded permanently to the MG chassis. Bertone and Arnolt visited the MG factory in Britain, where they had to convince the makers to sell them MG chassis. Bertone's tale of bringing a wheel of the finest Italian Gorgonzola cheese as a door-opening gift fell flat when the British found the cheese's odor rank and threw the wheel out. Perhaps because these would be custom cars unlike anything MG already made. Next, please. MG finally agreed to ship between 4 and 6 chassis at a time by boat to Genoa, Italy, where they were trucked to Bertone in Turin, where he hand-shaped and fitted coupe and convertible bodies to the chassis. Next, please. Completing each car in about 6 weeks, with roll-up windows, padded door panels, luxurious carpets, and the MG's characteristic central instrument panel inverted, forming a key design element. Next, please. The fully completed cars were then trucked to Italian ports and were shipped in various vessels to North American ports for local dealers, or sent to Arnold's shop in Chicago via the Great Lakes. There, the fully assembled cars were checked over, options like Borani wire wheels, next please, heaters, superchargers, alloy valve covers were added, all products made or distributed by Wacky Arnold's Auto Accessories Company, and the Arnolds were then offered for sale. The coupes were originally priced at $3,585. The convertibles were $200 more, with Borani wire wheels, $195 option. And the cars were featured on the covers of magazines and books about sports cars. Next, please. Arnold advertised them as the Continental sports car for the entire family. Another contemporary ad reads, American designed with British MG engine and chassis and Italian styling by Bertone, the light, fast Arnold-mg is a sports car that your whole family can enjoy together. It is amply powered and beautifully streamlined for performance. Come in and take the wheel for a test run and discover what a responsible and dependable servant this Continental Sportster is. By early 1952, next please, Arnold's MGs had started to sell, and the advertising blitz in car magazines was telling. Next please, Arnold MGs were sought after by car aficionados who wanted something different, if not unique. Jack Parr, for instance, the TV personality, had one, as did, for reasons that still escape me, the US Air Force. 2 cars were given away as promotional gifts. Sadly, little is known about them. J.S. Inskip in New York bought more cars than any other dealer, close to 20, while other ordering dealers ranged from New York, San Diego, Los Angeles, Indianapolis, New Orleans, Houston, St. Louis, to Grand Rapids, and even to a good friend of Arnold's in Mexico. One purchaser, Ben Smith, next please, of Mount Kisco, New York, bought 3 coupes, some under his name and some under his Seaboard Construction Company, but it is not known why. Next, please. Cars were shown at American car shows and fairs. They were arriving steadily by boat from Italy, and sales looked promising. Next, please. But then competition grew. The Arnold's original price was just about $3,600 when a stock TD was $2,000. And the recently introduced odd but race-winning Porsche 356 cost just under $4,000. The Jag XK120 was priced at $300 more than the Arnold at $3,940. But it offered literally 120 mile an hour and 160 horsepower performance. And at the same price, one could even buy a Lange Aurelia in Italy. Next, please. Although the Arnold was advertised as weighing the same as the stock TD, sources have always reliably reported that it was actually a few hundred pounds heavier. A stock MG could never be called overpowered with 54.4 horsepower and a top speed of 77 miles an hour. The aerodynamics of the Arnold's Bertone design certainly added a handful of miles per hour to the top speed, but it was still so underpowered that later Arnold offered the XP-EG engine as an option, in addition to the Shorrock supercharger, which he himself distributed. Now, to resolve the weight question once and for all, the again excellent John Elwood took this Arnold MG to his local transfer station and had it weighed on Tuesday last. Next, please. And after deducting sound deadening, his weight 60 pounds for a full tank of gas and a few small extras, I can even more reliably report that his car weighed 2,220 pounds against the stock TD at 2,060, only 140 pounds heavier. But remember, Arnolt advertised it as weighing just a slight amount more. Like a TD, the Arnolt was no speed demon, and an Arnolt could not easily be lightened and modified as a TD could. In fact, there are only 2 documented races in which MG cars were entered, Arnolt-mg cars, and an Arnolt-mg figures nowhere in the final standings of either race. Despite its Italian heritage, Arnolt-mgs were never intended to be competition vehicles. Next, please. Wacky Arnold's keen vision had blinders. The bottom line is that American car buyers were not ready for such a car as the Arnolt-mg, underpowered and heavy as it was. Nor was the buying public really wanting a family car in an Arnolt. The back seat is very tight, even for small legs. The car was taller than an MG, and the extra height and weight contributed to body lean. It was stiffer than a stock TD because the Bertone body was welded to the chassis. But there is something in the handling that is lost when the whippy MG chassis is restrained. Common as the MG cars were, one still needed to take them to a specialist garage or dealer able to properly tune and maintain them. I've spent some time reading a wide variety of American sports car magazines from the early 50s to get an overall feel for the period. And I realized that while the Arnolt-mg was the cheapest Italian-bodied sports car on the American market, mainstream American buyers did not really want a custom, slippery Italian design. Racers did. Bertone's design is typical of the Ferrari designs of the day: long nose hiding the big engine compartment and a relatively stubby passenger compartment. That the Arnolt is often called a baby Ferrari. And if you look at John's Arnolt, you see those characteristics: a very long body, a fairly short passenger compartment set well back in the chassis. Next, please. I know I was drawn to the Arnolt because it was the closest I ever expected to come to owning a 50s custom Italian body after my various attempts to buy an Alfa 1900 failed. So unfortunately, sales could never be said to be quick. Some cars were out on consignment for more than a year, and cars began to pile up in the warehouse. Because of this, Arnold's coupe pricing had to be adjusted downward from the original $3,585 to $2,995 for a coupe. The first cars, the 2 prototypes, were shown at Elkhart races in September of 1952, and the production cars were first shown at the New York Auto Show in March 1953. Pardon me. Contemporary design authorities praised the Arnolt. In the fall of 1953, next please, the Museum of Modern Art, in the second ever show of automobile design, called succinctly 10 Automobiles, included an Arnolt-mg in the cars selected primarily for their excellence as works of art. To justify showing cars at a Museum of Modern Art, they considered them to be rolling sculpture. It is certainly a high honor and recognition of extraordinary design to be included with the likes of the Cunningham C3, Raymond Loewy's Studebaker Commander, the Lancia Aurelia, Aston Martin's DB2, and the Porsche 1500. For reasons that various sources have tried to explain, so many facts are shrouded in the mists of time. After less than 6 months, next please, MG ceased to supply Arnolt and Bertone with TD chassis, the last of which was delivered in May 1953. Some have suggested that this was because MG was winding down TD production excuse me, and shifting to the TF, or that, quote, MG changed its car design in 1954. But the TD and TF chassis are identical, and MG carried on to make some 2,000 more TDs and 10,000 TFs in the rest of 53, 54, and 55. So that seems an unlikely explanation or justification. And since the MGA design with an entirely different chassis did not appear until 1956, other suggestions seem like a very stretched timeline. Another suggestion was that MG simply could not afford to supply the cars to Arnold, as the American demand for their cars exceeded production. But this also seems unlikely, since the TF was a stopgap car. Yet another suggestion was that SH enthusiasm and attention had already shifted to design and manufacture of the Arnold Bristol. Next, please. His six-cylinder sports racing car, built on chassis supplied by the British Bristol Car Company and bodied by Bertone. Among other racing successes, Arnold Bristol cars won their class in 3 years of racing at Sebring, where stiff European and American competition was the norm. Costing between $4,000 and $6,000, this powerful Arnold Bristol was the more fully realized version of Arnold's dream of a sports racing car, and no doubt offered greater profits than the arnolt-mg. In fact, at one point, Arnold considered putting the six-cylinder Bristol engine into the arnolt-mg. Michael Arnold, Wacky's very helpful son, tells me that his understanding for the real reason was that after MG saw the arnolt-mg, MG became concerned that the special car might divert customers away from the normal MG production run, and they began to feel perhaps jealous of Arnold's plans. Still, another opinion is that the cars simply weren't selling very well, and that perhaps Arnold himself ceased the arrangement with MG. But no matter what the reason, with MG chassis, next please, no longer available, the production of the arnolt-mg ceased after 103 cars. 67 coupes and 36 convertibles had been assembled of the planned 200. That's 103 cars. According to delivery ledgers generously supplied by Michael Arnold, the last Arnold, perhaps a demonstrator, was not sold until May 1955, although some sources document that it was as late as 1958, or perhaps even 1959. This is just another example of how much conflicting information there is out there. As I said before, thanks to John Elwood, you have a chance to see his Arnold Coupe 221 and some of the finer points. Next, please. From the factory images taken by John Wheelock in 1952, you can see the wooden bucks or forms over which the body panels were trial fitted. The arnolt-mg had aluminum doors, trunk, and bonnet lid, and a steel body. By and large, the arnolt-mg was built the exact way a Ferrari, Alfa, or Lange body would be, as those shop images confirm. Since I maintain the Arnold registry, I could tell you that surviving numbers are a bit vague, since not every car is documented, because cars in storage or undriven are discovered from time to time, and because sometimes the ownership history is a bit tangled, human memory being what it is. Also, there are some cars, a total of 5, that are known to have been scrapped, their condition being too poor to restore in the 1970s and 80s. I don't know if these 5 scrapped cars would be considered rescue-worthy today, as cars with very significant rust are being restored as we speak. Sherwood Parker's coupe in Arizona has had literally the bottom foot of the entire body restored due to rust. And this, which is Charlie and Mary Baltronis' car in Connecticut, now have their car on a rotisserie to repair significant rust and other damage. As you can see here, the entire floor has been replaced, as have significant portions of the aluminum doors, next please, rocker panels, the front and rear fenders on both sides. Both of these cars, Sherwood's and Charlie and Mary's car, might have been considered beyond repair 20 or 30 years ago, but will now emerge better than new at the hands of skilled craftsmen working on them. They are unlikely ever to deteriorate again. Sadly, there was a time when these were considered to be just old cars, and extensive modifications were not unusual when whatever it took to get a car on the road was probably all right. At least two cars had Triumph engines stuffed into them when they were acquired without engines, and at least 3 cars had or have V8 engines under the hood. My car, 252, is one of them, with a Ford 289, a top loader, and a 9-inch rear installed. The engine that was put in this car after the original engine was removed was a V8 engine. Obviously, any modification like this required extensive modification, including much cutting and riveting in of new firewall and engine side panels, frame modifications. In my car, they cut out the entire pedal box and installed drop-down pedals rather than go-up pedals. And they did major welding to accommodate the differential and the transmission. But my car, at least, was happily driven in Las Vegas for about a decade. So how bad could it have really been? And of course, there are restorations and restorations. Next, please. As with an MG, if one doesn't care how it looks, one can probably get a derelict Arnold on the road for minimal money. Brakes, engine, wiring, and some sort of interior are really all that one needs. My car, for instance, I bought with fiberglass racing bucket seats. I've gotten long-term TDs stored back on the road for less than $1,000 in brakes, engine, and tire work. Will such a car be pretty? Absolutely not. Will it run and stop? Yes. And Arnolds are still surfacing and are still available if one is willing to do the work. Next, please. Right now, convertible 257 in Ohio needs rust repair and a drivetrain and can be bought for less than $15,000. And Coupe 275, of which this is a sad picture, lacking the engine, just sold a few months ago in Florida for about $10,000. Next, please. Rust is inevitably going to be a significant issue in any inexpensive Arnold. But I would guess that there are now a dozen cars undergoing restoration, and cars do change hands. Naturally, restored cars will always bring the big bucks, but project cars are much cheaper. Most recently, last year, Gene Ponder sold at auction his latest fully restored, one might say over-restored, coupe and convertible. The coupe for a little bit more than $60,000, and the convertible for $176,000. I can't say that I agree with these prices, but they do appear to be what the market will bear. I should point out that Arnold cars have a worldwide appeal and can be found in collections in France, Germany, Belgium, Portugal, the UK, and a number of other countries. Next, please. Of course, to restore an Arnold right requires experience and skill in metalwork, a good deal of money and frustration, and a dedication. The red car that you've been seeing occasionally is one of the nicest restorations from Fantasy Junction, and that was sold in 2008. But even that car highlights the difficulty in finding some parts. So the characteristic Italian pull handles found on our Arnolds can also be found on Ferraris of the time, and Alfas and Langes. So those parts can be found, but at a very high cost. Next, please. To save on costs, Bertone used many parts from the Italian parts bin as possible. Finding the small running lights is another problem. Here you can see the small round beehive light. 75% of restored cars solve the difficult running lights by replacing them with the round Lucas beehive lights found on so many British cars at the time. John's car over here, you'll notice if you stop over later, has very small sort of eyebrow windows, lights that are very rare. As far as I've been able to find, those lights were used only on some Ape three-wheel commercial versions of the Vespa scooter, and therefore those parts are almost impossible to find today. Next, please. Original Italian parts for the wiper motors, and fuel gauges and senders also are very hard to find. But enterprising restorers like Sherwood Parker are modifying modern units to work like originals. Now, one more, next please. Here you can see the original sort of little eyebrow windows that are so rare. One thing to note is that there are subtle differences between the first 2 or 3 prototype cars, none of which has been located, and all other cars. Next, please. The major change is where the body crease or kick-up happens at the rear of the car, right here. You can see that the early prototypes show the kick-up on the rear fender past the rear edge of the door, while the production cars, next please, show the kick-up about a foot further forward at the front edge of the door handle. It's a subtle change, but again highlights the absolute custom nature of these cars. Remember, these changes were made after the first 3 cars were made. Other than the obvious unique body panels, there are 2 car parts that are also particularly expensive to restore for an Arnolt restoration: the windshield and the bumpers. The windshield is unique to the Arnolt and differs also from coupe to convertible. Now, windshields can be made. One has to make a model or buck and heat a piece of glass until it drops onto the buck and assumes what one hopes is the right shape. Next, please. An Arnolt owner in France has made windshields to fit his car, but so far it appears that those windshields won't fit any other cars. A high-end shop in the US needs a windshield and is considering making some, but the cost is obviously high. Bumpers are another hard-to-duplicate problem, as Arnolt bumpers were unique to these cars. I've seen MGTB bumpers used, I've seen Carmen Dia bumpers used, and a number of other choices, because making bumpers is obviously an expensive proposition. Next, please. A few cars have no bumpers at all and run with small Nerf bars, offering virtually no protection. One anecdote highlights the way Arnolt cars were absolutely distinctly custom. Next, please. An enthusiastic Arnolt fancier in Texas needed a door for a car he was having restored some years ago, and he finally located one in Australia, which he bought and had shipped to Texas at considerable expense. Next, please. Imagine his surprise to realize that the door was a full 6 inches short of filling his car's door opening. The only way I can account for this discrepancy is that the door may have come from one of the prototypes or was an unrecognized door change. Remember, the first 3 cars are unlocated. Now, I've only skimmed the surface here. There is so much more to discover, glean, prove, and tell. I will end with some statistics to show you that there are still discoveries to be made. The whereabouts of 14 of the 67 coupes, or about 20%, have never been documented, and 6 of the 36 convertibles, about 16% of production, are also unknown. Even accounting for cars ruined in accidents in the 50s and destroyed, I have no doubt that the majority of these cars are still extant in barns, garages, collections, or hoards. I myself discovered and have been trying to purchase an unknown convertible from a long-term but disinterested California owner for almost a decade. I'm really not sure if I can even get it. It's not a car the owner has a love connection with, but it's a car he inherited. So he said he's willing to sell it to me, but but it's been more than 10 years. So where do Arnolt stand in terms of rarity? We can do a sort of Marty report with production figures. There were roughly 20,000 TDs, 10,000 TCs, and 10,000 TFs made. Of the 10,000 TFs, roughly 3,000 were TF 1500s. Of the 20,000 TDs, about 1,710 were Mark II, or TDC's cars. Of the 10,000 TCs, roughly 500 were EXUs, made with details for sale only in America. But of the 20,000 TDs, only 113 Arnolts were made. And all of these models I have listed were made by MG or with MG's support and approval. Next, please. The only T-Series car made in smaller numbers was the Inskip TD, a four-seater made with a stretched frame, doors, and top, of which only 12 were made. But these cars were modified in the US with neither the support nor the approval of the MG factory. So in a sense, they don't count. So really, the Arnolt-mg is the rarest T-type variant. As roads and driving have changed, T-Series cars show certain deficiencies in drivability, especially in speed, acceleration, and handling. What else is there? But later T-Series cars, including the Arnolt, can be made into great drivers. Next, please. With the addition of a front sway bar, a 4.3 differential, or a 5-speed transmission and a supercharger. John's car, by the way, has a 5-speed transmission and is going to be getting a supercharger. So Arnolts are beautiful, graceful, sophisticated, and refined cars, and everyone who owns or even sees one appreciates them as beautiful Italian-American and British amalgams. I'd like to end by quoting what Arnold Gingerich, a discerning sportsman, angler, car aficionado, and founding editor of Esquire magazine, wrote in 1966 about his 10 favorite cars, which included Bentleys, Jags, Cadillacs, etc. Quote, "I realized that my list of 10 druthers stopped at 9. But that was because I was saving for the last, the very best to me, at least, of all the rest. It's the Arnolt-mg, a dream of a beauty that was first confected for his own amusement by the Italian bodybuilder Bertone as far back as 1952 on the chassis of the MGTD. Wacky Arnolt, an impulsive man, saw it and got Bertone to build a limited number of them, and today they are becoming almost legendarily scarce. I had one for only a weekend over a dozen years ago, but it's a car that, once you've seen it, you would never forget." Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions. I assume we have a few minutes of time still.
Yep. This is Pam from NortheastWheelsEvents.com at the 2023 Kimberley Festival over here at the Simeon Foundation Automotive Museum in Philadelphia. For more cool events like this, make sure you check your car show calendars, NortheastWheelsEvents.com, SoutheastWheelsEvents.com, UKWheelsEvents.com, and while you're there, post and share your events. I'll see you at the shows.